when I first kind of got into leadership, I was so transactional. Like I knew how to do the business, and I having a level of diplomacy to be able to still get people to yield results, but and also have tough conversations and have them in a way that is direct but also soft.
Hey listeners, welcome back to The Practical Optimist, a podcast that explores the intersection of leadership and life. I'm your host, Ken Schmidt, founder and CEO of Turning Point Executive Search and author of The Practical Optimist, which I'm happy to say is now available at your local bookstores and online. I'm really glad you're with us today, and I hope you subscribe to our podcast as we continue to drop new episodes every other week. My guest today is someone I've known for 10 years. In fact, she was our first intern back in 2011, and since then, she's risen through the ranks at one of the world's largest staffing agencies, Robert Half International. Based here in San Diego, Maggie Pilgrim is one of the most hardworking, down-to-earth, and intelligent millennials you'll ever meet. As the oldest of three, whose dad spent 50 years with Hyatt and Starwood hotels, Maggie will share what it was like moving 10 times before age 17, forcing her to constantly build new relationships. She'll talk about the 5 core values her parents instilled in her and her development as a leader over the last 10 years in the fast-paced and hyper-demanding world of staffing. It's time to learn from one of the coolest millennials in San Diego as Maggie Pilgrim shares her thoughts about the intersection of leadership and life. Welcome, Maggie. I'm very excited to have you today as our guest on the Practical Optimist podcast. It's great to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me, Ken. I'm really excited to be here as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Who would have thought when we first connected, over 10 years ago, that we'd be sitting here today talking and chatting with one another about kind of the world of recruiting and staffing and leadership and development. It's been pretty amazing 10 years.
It has been, and have a lot to be grateful for our connection. And I just would never have imagined that we'd be here talking today. So.
Exactly. Well, the fact that you are actually our first intern at Turning Point, we hadn't even thought about doing internships way back then, but we got introduced through one of your professors, who is also to this day, is my biggest mentor in the search business, Ron Jervis. And he was just kind enough to put us together. And here we are now, 10 years later.
I know. I love telling that story actually to people, because when you came to that class and spoke, I mean, it was on the topic of LinkedIn, right? But I think at that point I had already maybe had discovered that HR or recruiting was something that I was interested in. And so I asked you for an informational interview, and I was not expecting to leave that meeting with you with an internship. It was it was out of left field for me. So it's a really good story that I love to tell, when I'm speaking in classrooms or universities or, young professionals trying to figure out what they want to do out of college is, take any opportunity that you can to meet with somebody, just because you never know what it's going to turn into. And working with you obviously changed a lot for me in determining what I wanted to do and joining Robert Half. So
right, exactly.
It's amazing.
Sure. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And obviously being in the recruiting world as we both are, one of the things that you learn year after year is, be open to opportunities, be open to connections. You might think your career is going to go in one direction. It might go someplace, totally different. But if you're not open to that, and at least open to that dialogue and that potential, then you're actually going to wind up closing off a lot of doors that would otherwise be great.
Exactly.
Yeah. And now, do you remember? So before I came into the class, and you may have already told me this, and I may have forgotten, but do you remember already having an interest in HR even before then? I'm not sure how early on in your college career you had been thinking about it.
Well, it was that class that I think I took that class my junior year. And so I knew, I was like, I'm getting really nervous. I got to figure out what I want to do. I got to find a job before I graduate. I need to start networking now. I feel like Ron really embedded that into our students. But the exercises that we did within that Business 300 course helped me determine that some type of HR recruiting was something that I wanted to do. So I was having a lot of informational interviews at that time with professionals in that field. So I had that idea, but it wasn't until I took that class that I really understood that was maybe a potential path.
Yeah, I remember always every time I went into that class to speak to Ron and the group. Also, I was always amazed by how many folks in that class, whether they were juniors or seniors, how many
Hmm.
of them had family businesses that they were part of. How many of them were first time, college students that nobody else in their family had earned a college degree. And I mean, Cal State San Marcos has such a great, population of students, a very diverse population as well.
Yep,
I remember
very.
being really impressed just by the drive and the ambition and the work ethic and just the down to earth, kind of attitudes of so many of the students there.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I mean, I had such a great experience going to school there, and all of my friends that I still spent a lot of time with, we all went to college there, right? And we all say the same thing, and everybody is thriving in their own careers. But I obviously go back and speak in classrooms and participate on campus as much as I can to give back to the university. And we network and partner with a lot of the universities, large universities here in San Diego. And we do have a lot of conversations amongst our team here about the students that come out of Cal State San Marcos and how much more equipped they are to enter into the workplace than maybe some of the other universities. So I feel like they do a really good job with that.
And it's amazing now you as a regional director for Robert Half and being in charge of all of San Diego, you certainly get a good exposure to all the different schools that are around here, both traditional four-year schools, but also community colleges, and
Yep.
even a lot of folks that don't have college degrees, but they're amazing accountants or executive admin or operations folks. And in your
Yeah,
role, Robert Half, you get to talk to a lot of those folks. Do you want to maybe share
I
a
do.
little bit about kind of what your current role is all about?
Yeah, sure. So, as a regional director, I oversee our operations on the professional talent solution side. So we also specialize on technology and marketing and creative type positions on a contract and direct hire basis, but that's a completely separate team. So the team that I oversee is our direct hire finance and accounting operations, along with our contract services on the finance and accounting side, and then our administrative and customer support practice group. So we have three offices here in San Diego, Carlsbad, La Jolla, and downtown. And so we have operations in all three of those branches. And so my responsibilities are to, support my leadership team and the development of the teams that we have that, are representing us in the marketplace, but also with supporting the teams in market share and, best practices and um, also trickling down information associated with, you know, what changes we're seeing within the organization as well. So it's a very diverse position.
That's great.
And it's been an interesting transition going from a production, being in production position to, now being out of production. So
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that you find yourself now in a pretty senior leadership role within a very large organization that's one of the 800-pound gorillas out there when it comes to
yeah,
staffing. Robert Half is very well respected, but I know you and I have talked about many times in the past that you kind of grew up with a lot of that exposure to leadership just with your dad having worked for so many years, 30 plus years with Hyatt, if I'm not mistaken, right?
yes.
Yeah.
So he was with Hyatt. Yeah, well, I think 30 plus years.
Wow.
Worked there through college, and obviously through his career, but spent 30 years with Hyatt and then spent over 20 plus years with Starwood and the Westin brand. So he retired last year up at the Bonaventure, the Westin Bonaventure. So um, very long, over 50 years in the industry. So
It's amazing.
amazing.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly right.
Yeah.
I think of myself being in recruiting for 26 years, and I think that's a long time, but I can't imagine doubling that,
Yeah.
in the same hospitality space that he's been in
Yeah.
for so long.
Well, 20 years in the recruiting industry is probably like, what they say about the cat's years, right? I mean, 20 years is
Exactly.
probably like 70 years.
Yes, right. Yes,
So,
exactly. Some days I think, this has been a busy week and it's only Tuesday morning, right? It's like, oh my God, it's only,
exactly.
it's only Tuesday. There's so much going
Yeah.
on. It was a
100%.
lot of fun. Exactly. So,
So,
so, so growing up then, did you have a lot of kind of direct exposure or insight into what it was like for your dad, running these different properties around the whole country? It wasn't just here in Southern California, but it was on a national basis. So, do you remember, kind of growing up and kind of getting that mentorship, if you will, that exposure?
I mean, absolutely. So we, I guess to maybe go back. So growing up, we moved 10 times, I think it was, and they
Wow.
weren't small moves. So they were big moves, some in different states. And every time, we would move and I'd go to a new school, right? So my dad's job had us traveling quite a bit. He was at the general manager, managing director level. So overseeing usually one property, but was the person who was managing the whole operations with his team, right? So
Hmm.
I knew growing up that my father's job was the reason, why we made those moves, but then also, why we lived the life that we did, right? And my mom stayed home and my dad was um, the one that supported our family financially. And I learned a lot from him growing up. I remember going to the hotels when I was a kid, and even as an adult, still to this day, like I'll meet somebody that he had maybe worked with even like 15, 20 years ago, and they'll say to me, he was the best leader that I have ever had a chance to work for. He's such a kind and amazing mentor to me. Like he's just amazing. And us kids always used to joke like, is this the same person? Because we did not experience, he was really tough on us, as kids. He had high expectations for us. And so we always used to joke about that. But, just listening to, the way in which people spoke about him, in the workplace, especially when I started to get into leadership myself, I was very intrigued by that, hearing that people could speak so highly of him. I wanted to be a leader from that perspective as well, and people to look up to me and want to work with me. And so that was something that I really have leaned on my dad to over the years, in helping me is how to be that type of leader, and just like the work ethic. He was a very present father, but still a very hard worker. He would work really, really long hours, and but still didn't miss any of my soccer tournaments or my cross country meets or whatever it was. He was always still there. And so um yeah, I mean, it's been something that he obviously was my first mentor I ever had, was my dad. So
Well, that's great. Like we said, that was always there for you, was always present, but at the same time, he still worked long hours, right? I think
yeah,
a lot of people think it's binary, where you're either a good parent or you're committed to your job, and
exactly.
you
You can
can't
do
do both.
both.
When the
Right.
reality is, you can do both. I mean, it's not easy. Obviously, I'm sure there
Yeah.
were some grueling times for him where he had to do a lot and probably working 7 days a week, at least mentally, if not physically. But
Yeah.
it can be done, and it's you can commit time to your family and to your job, and still do a good job, in both of those areas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did an amazing job at that. And, obviously he had my mom as well to support with that. I always say he was the CEO and she was the COO. She had all the operations move in the background, right? To with us kids and the house and whatever needed to be done. But yeah, I really look up to both of them for, you know, all that they did and do still.
That's great. No, it's amazing. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, as you and I have discussed in the past, that's why I chose the title of Practical Optimist for, for my
Yeah.
book and for the podcast too, because same exact thing for me. I feel so fortunate to have the practical, the realistic side from my mom. And she was also very fun loving, but obviously more
Yeah.
practical of the two. And my dad was, the visionary kind of optimist, the person that thought, all right, well, let's say yes and figure out how to get it done. Right.
Right.
So having a dose of both is really important. And if I let my optimistic side get the best of me, then I'm taking too much of a risk, right?
Yeah.
I'm not cutting off a situation or parting ways with a client, if you will, because I think, well, they're going to get better. Let's just give them another chance, another chance, another
Not in
chance.
tune with reality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the reality
Potentially.
is
Right.
some people just don't want to do that. They just don't want to get
Yeah.
better. But also, I don't want to be, so practical that I end up, like we said a few minutes ago, so I end up, missing out on or passing up on opportunities because I'm so practical and I'm so focused on, just what makes the most sense, that I miss out on those longer shots. So you've
Yeah.
got to have that balance of both to really be an effective leader today.
100%.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, I remember when we were talking earlier, kind of preparing for our discussion today, you had talked about kind of the importance of values in your family
Yeah.
and that you actually used
Yeah.
to talk about that, if I remember correctly, on a daily basis. Is that right?
I wouldn't say a daily basis, but it would come up often, right?
Mm-hmm.
In having family values. And I think that that's when I think about just my work ethic and how I prioritize things in my life, like I always go back to, the values that my dad and my mom talked about. And usually they were spoken about when we were learning a lesson. It was a learning lesson opportunity, right? So
Sure, sure.
but he our priority we had five priorities, and in order they were: number one, our health, right? If you don't have your health, then what else do you have? Number two was family. And back then, and still, we all we ever had really when we were making all those moves were each other, right? So our family unit has and always will be very important. Number three was education and continuous education. Number four is work and working. And then number five was having fun and doing the things that you enjoy, right? So um, I think as we spoke about when we were, preparing for our call today, which I thought was a really interesting insight that you brought to me on Friday was, thinking about how those priorities, as I've been an adult, right? I think those were great priorities for me as growing up. And, when I was in college and, would I rather be out with my friends or should I be studying, right? So I can get an
That's
A
a
on
that's a
this test, right?
that's a
Or
tough decision to make. Yeah.
right? So but as I've, and grown to be an adult and have been in my career now for 10 years, I think that those priorities have maybe shifted, right? I think my health and my family will always be number two, but how you balance between, continuing to educate yourself, whether it's for me market trends or industry trends, right? What's happening in the job market, mastering, our operations here at our organization, um, or just even educating myself of things that I'm passionate about outside of work, right? I think that between, um, working and also having a balanced life, those are all kind of interchangeable to me at this point in my career, right?
Yeah, that's
Because
great.
I always try to tell my team, are you working to live or are you living to work? And my goal is for myself is to work to live, and I want everybody else to be in that same boat. So
That's a great attitude to have also. And I think,
yeah,
I wish there were more leaders out there, like you with that kind of attitude where you're modeling and you're expressing that it's okay to say that, work is not your number one priority in life. It really shouldn't be. Like I said, it should be family.
yeah,
It should be your health, those kinds of things. Work is not unimportant and it shouldn't
right,
be number 10 on your list, right?
right,
But at the same time, more leaders need to model more effectively the fact that it's okay that you're not going to be here 12 hours a day,
right,
and that self-care is so important, whether it's mental health or just exercise or diet, whatever it is, whatever's important to you, right? But having that balance is super important. I think I've mentioned to you in the past, one of the things that we have at Turning Point is something I call me time, right? Because my
mm-hmm.
team, everybody has kids. My kids are the oldest of everybody, but I want to make sure that because we're 100% virtual, I can't give them anything extra actually in the office, free lunches and that kind of thing. But what I can do is say, hey, once a month, I want you to go out and do something for yourself. That's not going to be, going grocery shopping or taking time to do this, have it be really something around self-care. So, get a massage, go play golf, go out to lunch with your spouse or whatever it is, right? And I'll reimburse you $100 for it every single month. And,
Yeah,
I
I
think
love
about
that.
those are the kind of things where if I gave them $100 bonus, it really wouldn't land the same way. It wouldn't have the same impact. But
Right.
modeling the fact that I want them to focus on self-care, that it's important for me in my life as well, but I want it to be important for them too. That
Yeah,
example is so important to set.
100%. Yeah. And it when you're a leader, you have to set that example. And so I try really hard to be sure that I'm showing people that you can have a balanced life. You can still work really hard and have the things that you want out of your career and still can be successful in this business and not have to work 12 hours a day. It's just how are you managing your time, right? And balancing all of the things in life. And I learned that though from my mentors and leaders too. In the 10 years that I've been with the organization, I've never been told once like that I can't take time off, not one time.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
um, I think that that's just been a cultural thing too, as an organization that they've done a phenomenal job with is, uh, allowing it being okay to take time off and the business will be covered
Right.
whenever
Right.
it is
Not
that you
going to
need
fall
to.
apart.
It's not
Yeah.
going to fall
Exactly.
apart,
Yeah.
So,
That's really interesting that you say that, and I want to kind of get your take on this as well. So the reason that I got into recruiting, right? The reason I was at Enterprise Rent a Car for 5.5 years. The reason
mhm,
I left Enterprise was the exact opposite of what you just said. I wanted to take some time off, and my first son was born, and I was told, no, you can't. You can have a few days off, you can have a week off, but that's it. I wasn't even asking to go on vacation or to go to Bali or someplace amazing. I wanted to be home for 2 full weeks, for first 2 weeks of my son's life. And I was told no, because the work ethic was considered to be compromised, or I wasn't as serious about my work if I wanted to take time off. And I
yeah,
said, you know what, this is bullshit. I mean, this is not for me. This is how it
yeah,
is right now. How's it going to be as my kids grow up and I want time off? And so I said, you know what, I'm done. So I gave a month's notice. And they actually said, Ken, what can we do to keep you? And I said, well, can we refocus our energies here so that I can take more personal time, still work very hard, but at least have that balance? And I said, is that going to change? And they literally said, no, it's not. I said, well, all right, then here's
there's
my
your answer.
resignation. I'm out
There's
of
your
here.
answer.
So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, after 5+ years, and this is back in the late 90s. So it's great
yeah,
fast forwarding today now to 30 years later, or not quite 30, but almost 30 years later, right? In 2023, and now it's a matter of you as a professional, as a leader now, 10 years at your company, you expect that they're going to say yes. You can
yeah,
take time off. In fact, you better take time off. We don't want you in
right.
the office 52 weeks out of the year.
Yeah,
It's great to see that example of some evolution, if you will, among leadership.
yeah, yeah. I agree. And our company and wasn't always that way, I'm sure. And even when I first started 10 years ago, taking a week off was a long time. I remember feeling a sense of anxiety around like, is everything going to be okay if I'm gone for 5 days?
Sure, sure.
And I'll never forget it. Somebody I was dating at the time, we went on vacation and I was checking my emails. He's like, can you just unplug? Oh, he's like, that's what vacation's for. So, but there was that expectation. But over time, I think we've done a phenomenal job of promoting people to, take time to recharge. And, even for myself, being comfortable enough to step away. And that's, somebody said that to me one time. You know that you're in a good spot as a leader if you can actually step away from the business for a week or two and nobody's calling you, or the house isn't on fire and you're being bothered while you're out. So you
Right.
know I feel really excited about, like, that's the type of culture that I've tried to create amongst our team here, at least in San Diego, is when people unplug, like they can unplug.
Right, exactly. And
So
that's the way it should be, right? And you and I have
yeah,
had this discussion offline as well about how important it is to show up, whether you're an employee, but especially as a leader, to show up as a whole person, as a human being.
yep,
Right? One of the things I talk about in my book is it's a whole chapter about it's okay to be human. right?
Yeah.
Gone are the days where, you're expected to come in and just be a robot and just clock in. You're just a number and nobody cared about your personal life. Your leaders didn't know your kids' names. They didn't care about it, that kind of thing. Those
Yeah.
days are long gone. And now it's the opposite. If you don't show up as a whole person, as a human being, then you're considered to be, obviously robotic, but also not a very advantageous place to work either. Which has been interesting. So I'm curious.
Yeah.
So for you, right? So you're a one of the youngest millennials, right? Or I guess maybe not quite Gen Z, oldest Gen Z, right in that cusp there, right? How is it for you when you're now, managing people that may be, older than you by 10, 20 years, but you're
Mm-hmm.
also now managing folks that are just coming into the workforce that
Yep.
were, that are the age now that you were when you first got to Robert Half. So
Yep.
how does that work in terms of figuring out how to manage those different populations?
Yeah. I would say that that has been one of the more challenging developments for me as a leader, is learning that every person that you manage, and frankly, any such situation, is completely different, right? Somebody who, um, I have somebody on the team who's been in the industry way longer than I have, and is very competent in their job. Frankly, sat in my job before I did. So,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah. So role reversal, right?
Yeah, sure. Knows firsthand.
Knows firsthand. And so am I really managing that person? No, and we've talked about this a lot is servant leadership. I will say that that is one thing from my perspective that is consistent across the board. Is I am a servant to the people that, I'm a servant leader to them. Like, what is it that they need from me in order to be successful? That's kind of how I look at my position, whether you're a new hire or somebody who's been in the business for a very long time. But somebody who has been in the business a long time and I can have that. What is it that you need from me? It's more of a very direct conversation because they know and they're self-aware and um, they have an idea of how we're going to work together to get our goals accomplished, right? Versus maybe somebody who is brand new, they don't know, right? So there's a lot more directive there involved. And, I think also understanding like what motivates people and, what's your why? Why do you do this every day?
Yep.
Why do you come to work at Robert Half? Or why are you in the industry? And really understanding those motivators and helping drive through, the business and tying it to those personal lives, right? But I learned, and what I mean by situations are, am I managing this person? Am I leading them, or am I directing them in this situation that I'm dealing with today?
That's
Whatever the circumstance is, right? So
a great way to put it.
I
It's good to
try to
kind of remind yourself of what you're focusing on and what,
exactly.
what's needed in this particular scenario.
Right, exactly. So that's always what I try to remind myself too is, dependent on the situation of the person that I'm having the conversation with and, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish here and what kind of hat, I guess, so to speak, do I need to put on? But, it's when I think just at the end of the day, everybody needs something different, right? And needs to be led differently or managed differently or whatever it is. And so I think having a level of emotional intelligence to also like be, humble enough and practical enough to say like I don't always have all the answers, but I'm here to support and um, at the end of the day, like I'm here to help them.
That's a great point. Yeah, exactly. And
So,
and being willing to be vulnerable and
mhm,
to your point in saying, I don't know. I just,
yeah,
I will find out. I know it's important to you. It's important to me also. I don't have the answer right now, but give me a couple days or whatever, and I'll get back to you. And then actually
yeah,
following through, right? The worst thing
100%.
worst thing leaders can do is say, I'll find out, or I'll get this done, or I'll resolve this for you, and then they disappear and it never comes back around again. I mean, there's no faster way to show your employees that you don't care
Lose
than to
trust,
not follow
really.
through. Yeah, and leave them
Yeah.
to their own devices. Yeah.
Yep. 100%.
Exactly. So I'm curious, given your 10 years with Robert Half,
Hmm.
hasn't been all 10 years that you've been in leadership, obviously, but it's been a number of years. Are there skills or traits that you now realize, God, it's so important that that I develop these skills as a leader that you really didn't think much about or didn't think it was going to be important, when you first started your career? Any surprises around those skills?
My business is all about relationships, right? It's about relationships with clients, it's about relationships with candidates, but I think most important too is relationships internally, right? And building your brand. And so um, I think as I started getting into leadership, like fostering and building relationships internally and how important that is for your career development, and also just how important it is for even our clients and candidates and going to market share, right?
Sure.
I think that is something, is like your reputation is brand, and your brand is what you really have, right? And so um, I think being able to understand how important that is amongst leadership too. I think that was one thing that was really eye-opening for me as I transitioned into a leadership position. Like, how was I collaborating amongst other practice groups or leaders within the region, and what was their, perspective of my ability to deliver to their clients, or, service, you know, build our market share in our territory, and also to develop people underneath me, right? So I think the branding and reputation was one of them, but also just diplomacy. So
That's a great word. Yeah, diplomacy.
um,
I like that.
learning how to um, have have fun doing what we're doing, but also have a level of accountability and responsibility for performance and results. Um, I think that when I first kind of got into leadership, I was so transactional. Like, I knew how to do the business, and I having a level of diplomacy to be able to still get people to you know yield results, but and also have tough conversations and have them in a way that is direct but also soft, right? Yeah, diplomacy. So
That's
I
great.
think,
I, I,
yeah,
I love that. I think that's a really good word to use, and I think and that should be the title of your book, is diplomacy, right? I think
diplomacy.
that's a great
Yes.
that's a great trait to use to describe yourself, because it covers so much ground, right? I
Yeah.
mean, diplomacy is not just in matter of in a manager to subordinate type of a relationship or engagement or interaction. It's also peer to peer. It's also diplomacy managing up, right, to
Yeah.
the people that oversee you as well. It's diplomacy with our clients, making sure that they
Yeah.
understand that we are here to help them. We have their best interest at heart, and sometimes that does require a difficult conversation, right?
Yeah.
And getting into those crucial conversations, and with candidates too. As recruiters, we're no good to our clients if we don't have candidates, and the opposite's
100%.
also true. And so you've
Yeah.
got to be able to balance that too. So that's a great word. I like that. Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you.
So in terms of kind of where you're heading from here, so it's been 10 years, right? You obviously, you're very good
Mhm.
you've been very effective in leadership also. Do you see yourself, or is there a goal to continue on the leadership development track where maybe eventually you're overseeing a bigger team? And I ask the question because, like, for me, I like leadership, I like management, but I've
Mhm.
learned over the years kind of where my expertise really stops and starts. I think I'm a good leader for small teams. I don't know
Mhm.
if I'd be quite as good if I had a team of 30 or 50 or 100 people,
Yeah.
which is not necessarily a bad thing, and I'm comfortable. I'm okay with that. But not everybody has that desire or that ability to manage larger teams. Also, where do you
Yeah.
think where do you hope to take your leadership career?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And it's I feel like I've had so many opportunities so quickly to grow within the organization that I'm kind of just happy with where I am today and
That's
like
great.
still
Yeah.
trying to learn and develop into my role now. I've only been in the regional position since last April. So, and honestly, the longest I've ever been in a position with the company is 2.5 years. So,
Wow. Wow. So very,
um,
so constant upward mobility and
so
changing
constant, it's
functions.
yeah,
Yeah.
100% quickly too, you know,
Yeah.
so I think I'm looking forward to spending some time in the role I'm in today and mastering this position. And, you know, I feel comfortable with the size team that I have today. You know, is there an opportunity to maybe take on another region down the road? That could be a possibility. Just depends how big the region is. Um, you know, I think could I see myself going upward into the organization into a bigger position potentially? But I also love being close to the business, and um, meaning I love interacting with clients. Like I still get emails and phone calls from clients and candidates needing help, or hey, you helped me 6 years ago, and I love that, and that's why I got into the business, right? And I think the the higher up that you go within the company, the farther away you get from that, and
Which
so
is true of any larger company. That's what
yeah.
typically happens, right? Exactly.
So I think in thinking about taking on more responsibility, that's the one, thing that I am holding on to. So I could also see myself going in back into a producing role maybe one day if I decide that that's what I want to do. The beautiful thing about our organization is we are expanding in so many different ways that um, it doesn't just have to be, I guess, going from a regional to senior regional to district. We have so many different practice groups that I could potentially be a part of where I could still have that senior leadership responsibility while also being close to the business. So, I think I will have options when that time comes, but I think I'm just excited to tackle and master the role that I'm in today. And
That's great.
and maybe stay in a role for more than 2.5 years.
Gee, wouldn't that be
So
nice?
that would be nice, but yeah. So that's my answer.
That's great. So when you are talking to more junior candidates, and I know you do a lot of volunteering as well. You speak at Cal State San Marcos,
Mhm.
still here in San Diego, and you do work for JA and some other areas also. When you're talking to younger professionals or even folks that are still students, what kind of advice do you give to them? What do you impart on them that maybe you wish you had heard when you were at that stage?
Um, well, I can share what I wish I heard, but also what I heard and what I think helps me,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, sure, sure.
So, as when we talked about this on Friday, I was kind of reflecting back on like when I was a young professional, still consider myself a young professional at heart. So, I didn't always know what I wanted, right? And um, I started to slowly figure that out in college, but I think that can be rare for some people, that they don't know what they want to do with their degree after they graduate, right? And so I think it can be a scary time, right? Trying to figure
Sure.
out your path and, especially with today's world of work, it just looks so differently than it ever has before, right? So I think that at that time there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of pressure too, right, to find a job before you graduated. And society's filled with a lot of expectations. And frankly, that's at every stage of life, right? There's,
Right. Yeah.
you get your degree, you get a job, you buy a car, you buy a house, get married, you have kids, you do all these things, right? Like there's society
Right.
expectations. And
The way that
so
you're supposed to do things. Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
supposed to do things, right? Which is
Theoretically.
so funny. So, I think what I try to always just focusing on like what you want out of your life, forget the noise, and focus on what you want and don't let that external influence what you want to do. But I do think it's also very, very important to have goals and a path forward. And so, whether it's making short-term goals that help you put your long-term goals into play, you have to have a way forward, right? So, I think as I think about just like some advice that I had when I was graduating, I mean, like we talked about, like, even though I'm in the recruiting industry and relationships and connections are so important, I think that can be transferable to any field, frankly.
I agree.
And so, I think learning how to network early on and how to build relationships with people, um, with whatever industry you're looking to get in or whatever your networking goals are, right? So learning the importance of relationships. I can't tell you how many informational interviews I did in college, like from that class on till I found a job at Robert Half. I had a lot of interviews too, but I did a ton of informational interviews with professionals in the recruiting industry and human resources, um, even just sales positions. Like I basically would, anybody that I met from a networking perspective, I would email them and ask them for an informational interview. And if they agreed, like I would take that opportunity,
Yeah,
right?
great. Yeah, back to the whole, that we discussed earlier about being open to opportunities and being
Yes.
flexible. And, you might think your career is going to go one direction. It could go somewhere else just
Yeah.
because you were willing to
So,
have a discussion with somebody.
right. So I think you have to put yourself out there. It wasn't always comfortable asking for a meeting from somebody who I couldn't really give anything back to just because I you know, hadn't had that experience yet, right? But
Right, right.
you kind of have to be vulnerable and be uncomfortable if you're gonna move yourself forward. So, I think networking and putting yourself out there and being open to, learning from as many people as you possibly can to help you get towards that long-term goal is really important.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and just never giving up. Like you have to put the work in, to get to your goals and put the time and effort into it. And if you do, it will come. So,
Yeah,
but I
very
think
true.
like just the relationship piece is so important. And you know I know we'll talk about mentoring too, but
Yeah. Well,
huge
I think,
part.
having moved as many times as you did, you said, almost 10 times. And I think you ended up moving, your junior year of high school, which is never a good time to upend anyone, right? I'm sure that was
No,
challenging.
no, thanks, mom and
Um,
dad.
yeah, exactly. Right, right. Put that in the category of things that you won't ever do to your kids at some point, right?
100%. Yeah. And you wonder why I didn't go into the hotel industry.
Exactly, exactly. But I mean, even though I'm sure it was very difficult for you in your teenage years, especially
Yeah.
having been forced to go into different environments, different schools, different cultures, different states, different weather patterns, everything, right? So many
Hmm.
times, I would imagine that probably helped you to develop, better than most, develop those skills to build rapport and build relationships and meet people and have conversations. Because otherwise, you would have just been by yourself the whole time, and that would have been
Yeah.
very isolating.
Yeah. 100%. I think, in a lot of those times too, like we would move in the middle of the school year. So it wasn't like I was starting a new school year or we came back from winter break and, it was in the middle of a school year where I'd have to walk in on a Monday and in the classroom was like, hey, here's the new girl. So
Wow. Yeah.
it was incredibly difficult. And, the longest that we ever stayed anywhere was 3.5 years. So, for me, it was incredible. It was difficult.
Sure.
But, as I look back on it as an adult, like you said, I think that those experiences of moving and having to build relationships and rapport with people quickly, it transferred skills to what I do today, right? And
Yeah.
I think being able to be put in those uncomfortable situations because it was very much uncomfortable. I mean, my first my junior year of high school at my new high school, I ate lunch by myself on the first day. Like that's uncomfortable,
Yeah.
So
Right.
you have to have a level of resilience and thick skin, to go through those things as a kid. And our job is not easy. There's a lot of rejection in the industry, and I think even when I was going through the process of job searching, that back in 2012, the market was so different. I mean, it took me 5 months to find a job
Wow. Yeah.
after
Yeah.
graduation, and I got a lot of no's, a lot of no's. And you, I had to get up and keep going. And I think to your point, going through that as a kid enabled me to be as resilient and get through tough times like I have, my professional career.
Sure, sure. Did you
So,
have an awareness at all? I know you because your sister is what 2 years younger and your brother is
mhm,
5 years younger, right? Do you remember having to back to the whole piece about vulnerability, but also responsibility, and maybe even diplomacy that you talked about before either? Do you
yeah.
remember being aware of the fact that however you were responding and how what you were modeling, they were probably kind of following suit? Like, oh, if Maggie's okay, then I'll make it through, and if you were stressed out, then they kind of emulated that kind of thing.
I feel like we each had our different experiences. Like my sister she went through I mean, my parents lived in the desert in Palm Springs for 5.5 years. So she got to finish all of high school. She was in middle school when she moved there. So,
Okay, okay, yeah.
I think our experiences, my brother had to move his senior year of high school. So that was a tough
Wow.
one. I think the two of us could probably relate. You know, I, I think too, the moving stopped as they got older. It was a lot for us
Hmm.
until I left our house. So,
Sure.
I think it's actually kind of a joke in the family that I've set the bar a little too high. So, that my brother and sister love to give me a hard time
I'm
about
sure.
that.
Yeah, exactly
So,
right. Never let you live it down.
never let me live it down. So, I think we each had our own experiences and probably took different things from,
Hmm.
what we experienced as kids.
Sure.
Um, so yeah,
That's great. Yeah, good, good. Well, and the last topic I want to touch on, which you mentioned a few minutes ago, is mentorship, right?
yeah,
And I'm such a huge believer in mentorship, and I wish that the U.S. as a country, I wish we'd do a better job compared to other countries where it comes to apprenticeships or mentorships or what all
yeah,
those things kind of go together. And it can be tough. Are you as a mentee or as someone who is looking for a mentor? It can be difficult if your company doesn't have any kind of a formalized program.
yeah,
And if you are someone who wants to be a mentor, who wants to share and help others out, it can be kind of tough as well because it's not always a very natural relationship. Sometimes it
yeah,
just kind of evolves, right? You happen to meet somebody, you hit it off, and they're at a different point in their career, and so they help you out, and vice versa. Other times it is forced because there's a formal program internally and you just don't click with that person for whatever reason. And now
yeah,
you're in a very uncomfortable situation where it's mandated that you have to mentor this person and it's just the chemistry's not there. So
yeah,
what are your thoughts around mentorship? What are some things that you do or that you might also recommend to others that are looking for strong, mentorship relationships?
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's obviously formal and informal mentorship, right? But as I take a look back on just my life, right, and how I got to where I am today, whether it's through my professional or personal accomplishments, there has always been somebody in my corner mentoring me throughout whatever those experiences were, right? I mean, from the early stages of my life, I think like I said earlier, my father was my first mentor and continues to be a huge mentor. You've been a huge mentor to me, Ken, over the years and have continued to be. I've had Ron as well, who, I still have a chance to get together with, once or twice a year to catch up. You know, still pushing the executive search. He'll be disappointed I didn't say that's my 10-year plan today. So sorry, Ron.
Exactly.
But I think also just as I think about my mentors within Robert Half as well, I mean, even the people that were more because we have a formal mentorship program here at Robert Half, right? So, and it's a really great program, actually. They match you with an individual who's either been in your position for a certain amount of time, or maybe somebody that's just in a role above, to somebody who's brand new in their job. So,
Oh, wow.
even
Yeah.
in those, so they take the time to interview you one-on-one, the mentor, mentee, and then they match you, right? So, um, even with the formal mentors that I've had that maybe I didn't click with, I still learned a tremendous amount from. So, I went through that program, I think 3 or 4 times over the years. Some of those individuals I still keep in touch with. Some I don't, but even the ones that I don't, like I still learned a lot from, and it was very, very valuable for me.
There's still some takeaways, even from people that maybe
Yeah,
you don't see eye to eye with. But again, being open to those takeaways, coming to you.
exactly. So, um, I think yes. So, and then on the flip side, when it comes to informal mentorship, um, I was introduced to an individual. Her name's Louisa. She's a senior regional director for our organization. But when I got into, I think it was my metro market role back in 2018, she was a regional director at the time. And, we were introduced to one another, and she offered to informally mentor me. And um, fast forward to today, 5 years later, we still spend every other week on the phone together. And that now has been built into a friendship, right? And somebody that I trust wholeheartedly, that I can tell absolutely anything to and get really good advice from. And she's an amazing leader. But that's probably been the most impactful mentor that I've had in my career is her. And that was an informal one,
Mhm.
right? And
Right. Sure. Sure. It
one
wasn't
that
set
kind of
wasn't set up
started,
on an org chart
yeah,
someplace formally. Yeah, it just
right.
happened
So
organically.
it just happened organically, and has built into this amazing friendship and mentorship over the years. So I think and now for me, like giving back as a mentor too is really important. And I've done obviously the formal mentoring program and have been a mentor, but same situation. I've been mentoring somebody within the organization for years. When he got into his role, I was mentoring him, and now we're colleagues. Like we're in the same position. He's the regional director up in Orange County, and I'm here in San Diego, and
Wow.
we're colleagues together. And I've also learned a lot from him too, which reverse mentoring, right? I think that we both have gotten a lot out of that relationship. And so um, I think, for as advice for somebody, right, in identifying a mentor, right? I think it's everybody should be open to it, right? And I've learned so much from those individuals, but it's also just like, who else can I go to talk about something if I don't want to go to my boss about it, right? Or if I need another piece of advice. Those are really important relationships to have within an organization. And it's amazing that you can work for such a big company and things are done differently in different regions, right? So that's been um, really great. But I think being open, and if an organization has a formal mentoring program, being asked to be a part of it, right? And experience that.
Right. Sure.
But
Sure.
also just seeking out mentorship as well, I think is really important.
And
I
it
think
comes
over
in
the
different
years,
forms also. It
yeah,
becomes, yeah, I mean,
and it
I
goes
have,
two ways,
yeah, exactly. I have a formal, executive coach that I work with every couple of weeks. He and I meet virtually, and it's great. That's more formalized, right?
Yeah,
It's a formal engagement. But then I have a group of folks that I meet with that, four other people that also run executive search firms, and
yeah,
we all meet once every couple of months and talk about market trends. And like you said before, I can ask them anything, and they understand my business well enough to know what I'm talking about. But
yeah,
there's not a competitive aspect to the relationship, which is fantastic. So having that peer group, that circle of advisors, whatever you want to call it, is super important at really at any point in your career, but especially as you get further into leadership. I think it's absolutely. I mean, without it, you will fail. I mean, you really have
yeah,
to have it.
you
It's
do.
absolutely necessary. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And I think it's important, like when you, especially early on, like seeking those relationships. I remember being very proactive about that in my young, I asked to be a part of the mentoring program. Like, I was very, I wanted my call with my mentor every week. Like, it was important to me to learn from people that have been in the business for years and years and can give me a different perspective than maybe what I'm hearing amongst the region or our team locally, right? And I think even with you, I've always made a very conscious effort to make sure that, I stayed in connection with you. And I feel like over the years, like I've been able to add different values to our relationship that I couldn't offer when I was just an intern, So,
No, it's
I
true. And
think it's just
I learned so much from our discussions as well. Same kind of thing where,
right.
I've been doing this for a long time, but every day is still a learning experience, right? There's still
Yeah.
different ways to manage, different ways to handle these certain trends, different trends that come up out of the blue, right? So, I agree, having it be that two-way street where we're kind of learning from each other. And that's the way really I think a truly valuable mentorship relationship should be, is that, there's going to be times where both sides are going to learn from the other side.
Right.
It's not always 100% one-sided all the time.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. That's great.
Well,
Very good. Well, thank you so much for sharing, all so much of your insights and kind of getting a sense for kind of how you've navigated your career over these last 10 years at Robert Half and the things that you're doing. And I think, like we talked about, whether you're 22, 32, or in my case, 52, there's so much going on out there. And there's so much to be learned. And it is all about relationships, no matter what industry you're in particular in recruiting, but no matter what the industry is, you've got to have those strong relationships and those partnerships to really help guide you along throughout your career. So thank you for sharing all those insights and takeaways with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me.
All right, I will see you soon.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.